If you spend any amount of time online, and I mean, who doesn't these days,
Mm.
you're constantly interacting with systems.
Oh, absolutely.
Systems that are built to, monetize your attention, but also, in some cases, to police your behavior.
Right.
We're always taking in new information, forming new habits, and sometimes those habits can get, well, pretty intense.
And that's what we're really digging into today.
Yeah, today we are doing a deep dive into a really unusual and, frankly, a very sensitive crossroads.
Mm-hmm.
We're looking at where these high-intensity digital sexual practices meet the immense moral weight that's placed on some religious communities.
And what comes out of that pressure?
Exactly.
Yeah.
The result is this emergence of premium high-tech tools that are designed to sell you something like purity, or at least self-management.
It's a really fascinating look at how, deep cultural anxieties and these very specific faith-based pressures can actually drive market innovation.
Yeah.
And we're not talking about your generic wellness or self-help app here.
No, not at all.
We're looking at a very specific piece of technology that was developed inside a unique cultural pressure cooker, an app designed to combat something that's often framed as a full-blown addiction.
So our mission for this deep dive is to really unpack this whole stack of sources. First, we need to clearly define a pretty niche and high-intensity digital practice. Online, it's often called gooning.
Right. And then once we understand that, we have to explore the really profound psychological stakes of behavioral addiction that get tied up with this kind of compulsive content consumption.
And finally, we're going to do a critical analysis of a very private, very premium self-management app. It's called Goon-Free.
Mm-hmm.
And it was reportedly developed by young members of the LDS faith. That's the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
And they basically found a way to commercialize an institutional problem.
What do you mean by that?
Well, the immense spiritual and social cost of confession inside that system. So we're not just looking at what this app does, we're asking why it even exists, what it costs you financially, and maybe what it might cost you emotionally.
This is truly where tech, morality, and vulnerability all just collide. We're going to look really closely at how this massive culturally generated sense of shame creates an incredibly specific and very lucrative market for digital solutions.
Yeah, let's get into it.
Let's unpack this. We should probably start with the behavior that kind of kickstarts this entire industry.
Okay, so to really get why there's a market for these kinds of accountability apps, we first have to understand the specific behaviors they're trying to manage.
Right.
And that brings us to this term, gooning. It refers to a really specialized form of sexual practice that, well, it goes way beyond typical masturbation.
So in the secular world, on these online communities, how is this practice actually defined? What are we talking about?
It's described essentially as an extreme version of edging.
Okay, and for anyone who doesn't know, what's edging?
Edging is the practice of maintaining a really high level of sexual arousal for a long time, but without reaching orgasm. You get right to the edge, and then you pull back. In the context of gooning, that long time gets pushed to an absolute extreme. We're talking hours, potentially.
Hours. Wow.
Yeah. The goal is not a quick release at all. It's about pushing the physical and even the psychological limits of just how much arousal you can tolerate.
And the sources seem to emphasize that the objective here isn't just physical. It's about moving into a different kind of psychological state, like a deep immersion.
Precisely. For a lot of practitioners, the stated goal is to achieve this state of, they call it trance-like hypnosis, or even transcendent bliss.
That sounds intense.
It is. It requires this immense focus and immersion, and it's often, helped along by continuous high-intensity erotic stimuli.
Like pornography.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's constantly feeding the brain new and intense pornographic content to sustain that heightened state for what is, an unnaturally long time.
So that's why it's categorized as a high-intensity practice. It's this deliberate effort to achieve a kind of altered state of focus.
Right. And you mentioned that it's sometimes associated with substances, too.
Yeah, that's in the sources. To achieve or sustain this level of arousal and physical intensity, the practice is sometimes accompanied by consuming pornography, or in some cases, these inhalant substances that are known as poppers.
Can you break that down for us? For listeners who might not be familiar with that term, what exactly are poppers, and why on earth would they be associated with this?
Sure. So poppers is the slang term for a class of chemicals called alkyl nitrites. Amyl nitrite is the most famous one.
Okay.
They're inhaled, and they cause this immediate really intense vasodilation.
Which means?
It means they rapidly relax your smooth muscles. So we're talking about blood vessels, but also relevant here, sphincter muscles.
Ah, I said.
The effect is this really fast head rush or high, and it can enhance certain sexual sensations, especially those related to muscle relaxation. But it also jacks up your heart rate and blood flow, which can just intensify the whole physical experience of arousal.
So its association here just underscores this desire to push the physiological envelope, to just max out the pleasure in the trance state.
Exactly. It immediately frames the behavior as something highly specialized. This isn't just a casual habit. It's about leveraging this extreme focus and physical intensity.
And the term itself, gooning, it has this fascinating, almost kind of accidental origin story.
Yeah, where does that come from?
The sources trace it back to the goons from the old Popeye the Sailor cartoons.
From Popeye. You're kidding.
Not at all. Characters like Alice the Goon, they were often shown as being, a bit simple-minded, only able to focus on one single task at a time.
Okay, I think I see the connection now.
The connection is that the practice of gooning requires you to focus almost all of your attention, sometimes for a whole evening, just on the act of masturbation. You're effectively checking out of everything else, all of the responsibilities, all other mental processes, they just fade away.
So whether that was the original intent or not, the name itself really reflects that high degree of cognitive tunneling that's required for the practice.
It does. But, and this is a huge but, the way people interpret this practice is completely divided. It's bifurcated.
How so?
Well, on one side, you have these online kink or fetish communities. And in those spaces, it's often seen as a form of, deeper personal exploration.
Okay.
Proponents will celebrate it. They'll say it's a way to expand your pleasure potential or learn self-control over your arousal or achieve this kind of intimate, almost meditative experience.
A way to bliss out, as one source put it.
Exactly, a transcendent state of sexual focus.
But then, when you move over into, say, recovery circles or contexts where the behavior is seen as a problem,
The definition shifts completely.
and the label itself becomes kind of a weapon.
Precisely. In recovery circles, the term gooning, or calling someone a gooner, is used to define frequent or excessively long sessions of watching porn and masturbating. It's just lumped right into the category of porn addiction.
So it becomes a label for pathology, for excess, and it doesn't matter what the person's intention was.
Not at all. And this conflict, is it a kinky form of meditation or is it a compulsive addiction? That's where all the tension lies for the person who might be looking for help.
And regardless of how you define it, as a kink or as a pathology, the sources are really clear that there are significant psychological downsides when this kind of digital consumption and intense stimulation become excessive and routine.
And this is where that addiction framework really starts to become relevant. Because this level of excessive stimulation, it starts to warp the user's entire baseline for what arousal even feels like.
Okay, so what's the first major problem you see?
The effect on real-life sexual encounters. Because the digital content is designed to be so novel, so intense, so specific, it's engineered to maximize stimulation. Users can develop what is effectively a tolerance.
The tolerance.
Yeah, they might start to need that very specific, hyper-stimulating type of content just to get aroused or, to achieve an erection in a real-life situation with a partner.
Wow. It sounds like the digital habit starts setting an impossible standard for real intimacy.
That's absolutely right. This high-stimulus regimen can really spur a dependency on porn just to initiate or sustain arousal.
And for many people, that must be the first moment of crisis.
It often is. That realization that your solo habits have actually compromised your ability to connect sexually with a partner. And then, beyond that, these long solo sessions can completely morph your expectations around the duration of sex and pleasure.
Can you give us an example of how that expectation gets distorted?
Yeah, we see really clear examples of this in clinical reports. You have men who come in expressing this deep anxiety because they believe they suffer from premature ejaculation.
Okay.
And their reasoning is they climax after 10 or 12 minutes of penetrative sex.
Which to most people would sound perfectly normal.
Exactly. We have to remember the clinical definition. Premature ejaculation is climaxing within, seconds or maybe a minute of penetration.
Yeah.
Often before or immediately upon starting.
So the problem isn't actually premature ejaculation. The problem is they're comparing a normal sexual encounter to these hours-long solo sessions.
That's it, exactly. The excessively long, high-intensity solo sessions create this deeply unrealistic internal benchmark. It completely distorts what a normal, healthy duration of partnered sex even looks like.
And that must generate so much anxiety.
It does. anxiety, self-doubt, and this profound dissatisfaction with real-world intimacy. So the core problem, whether the behavior started as some kind of mindful exploration or just spiraled into a compulsion, is that this digital dependence is setting these unsustainable and frankly unrealistic boundaries for human connection.
So we've established the specific behavior now. Let's zoom out a bit to the larger crisis that fuels the demand for these digital solutions. We're talking about the profound toll of compulsive digital behavior, which often gets packaged under this big umbrella of porn addiction.
Right. And, the term addiction is used pretty broadly here, but the sources we looked at are unequivocal about the real-world harm, the harm caused by compulsive digital consumption, and crucially, the secrecy that goes with it.
And the impact on someone's life, both professionally and personally, can be, well, devastating.
Absolutely devastating.
So how does this pathology show up, beyond just the sexual sphere?
It bleeds into every aspect of life. Compulsive digital use, especially when it involves adult content, is reported to just drain a person's motivation, their focus, their energy.
Which leads to what? Decreased productivity, problems at work?
Yeah, and even job loss in severe cases.
Mhm.
But the most catastrophic damage, that's usually reserved for our most precious personal relationships.
When the compulsive use involves secrecy and deceit.
That's when it inflicts these mortal wounds.
And the sources really emphasize that for a partner, the betrayal is often worse than the act itself.
The deceit element is key. The hiding, the lying, the feeling that your partner is living a double life. That's often what partners cite as the core source of their pain.
Which leads to self-doubt, total mistrust.
And often the complete dissolution of the relationship. I mean, true pathological addiction in its most severe form can lead to these catastrophic life losses. We're talking loss of a job, loss of a marriage or partnership.
And the sources mention debt, too.
Yeah, racking up substantial financial debt, either related to the habit itself or just trying to conceal it. The psychological stakes are just enormous, which is why people are searching, often desperately, for quick, effective ways to stop.
And this desperation has created really fertile ground for a massive viral trend in the digital wellness space.
Right.
And you mentioned this is called the dopamine detox. This is the core concept that really informs the therapeutic design of a lot of these apps we're seeing.
We really need to clarify this concept because its popularity.
Yeah.
It just far outstrips its scientific precision.
Okay.
The trend was popularized by a neuroscientist and psychiatrist, Dr. Cameron Sepa. He introduced it as a non-clinical self-management strategy.
And it uses principles from what?
It uses foundational principles from cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, and it's used to curb a whole range of behaviors. Internet use, gaming, compulsive shopping, and crucially for our discussion, excessive porn and masturbation.
You noted, though, that the term itself is scientifically controversial. Why is that?
Because the name is incredibly catchy, but it's also very misleading.
How so?
Well, dopamine is an essential neurotransmitter. It's central to motivation, to learning, to anticipating rewards. You can't detox from it like it's a toxin.
And you would want to.
You certainly don't want to eliminate it. That would lead to complete lethargy and an inability to feel pleasure. The term implies this kind of chemical purging, which is just, it's inaccurate.
So what's the actual goal, if not to get rid of dopamine?
Dr. Sepa himself has clarified this. The actual goal is behavioral modification. It's about reducing impulsive, unhealthy behaviors by mindfully engaging in healthier, more productive activities instead.
So the goal is not chemical, it's about behavioral control and impulse management.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's look at the actual CBT-based steps that are involved in practicing this approach, because these are the tools that are being commercialized by these apps.
The whole approach is really rooted in actionable self-discipline. So the first step is building awareness.
Awareness of what?
Gaining insight into when and why the behavior happens. Is it triggered by boredom, by stress, specific times of day? Recognizing that pattern is absolutely essential.
And for many people, this just means realizing they have, crazy high screen time, or they're constantly checking notifications.
Right, which just feeds that impulse cycle. That's why the first step in these apps is always some kind of tracking.
Okay, that makes sense. What's next?
The next step is demarcating fasting periods. These are specific, dedicated times when the addictive activities are strictly off limits.
So you're creating boundaries.
Intentional boundaries. In an environment, the internet, that is fundamentally boundaryless. So this could be, say, 1 to 4 hours at the end of the workday, or dedicating one entire day every weekend to being free from that stimulus.
And I imagine physically removing the temptation is pretty critical here.
That's the third step, restricting access. You physically put the phone away, you log out of your accounts, you put the laptop in another room.
You're introducing friction.
Exactly. The goal is to make the unhealthy habit harder to perform than the healthy alternative. And during that fasting time, you move to the fourth step, which is finding alternate activities.
Non-digital things.
Yes, non-digital, productive, or at least low-stimulation tasks. Go for a jog, clean the kitchen, read a physical book, practice an instrument, anything to break the cycle.
And then there's the fifth, and I would imagine the most challenging step. The sources call it urge surfing.
This is the core of the psychological intervention.
Tell me about it.
So, practicing urge surfing means you watch the desire to use the stimulus, the urge, come and then go without engaging in it.
You just sit with it.
You recognize the impulsive feeling, you label it, there's the urge to look at my phone, and you just allow it to subside naturally rather than immediately gratifying it.
That sounds incredibly difficult.
It is, but it trains the brain to decouple the impulse from the action. It's how you break that reflexive response that really defines addiction.
It's powerful stuff, for sure, but it requires a ton of internal labor. I can see how the dopamine detox label, even if it's misleading, makes the practice feel more accessible and, viral.
That accessibility is the key to its market success. The term might be scientifically inaccurate, but we have to acknowledge that the techniques are soundly rooted in CBT for habit regulation.
Is there evidence that it works?
Well, clinical experience suggests that consciously restricting use can significantly reduce emotional distress and improve focus. We have evidence showing that restricting social media use, for instance, correlates with less depression and greater productivity. But we have to stress that the long-term specific efficacy of the detox model for severe sexual compulsion still needs more conclusive clinical evidence.
So what's the takeaway?
The takeaway is that professionals would strongly encourage anyone with a profound dependency to seek support from a mental health provider, not just an app.
Okay, so now we have to move from this general problem of digital compulsion to the very specific cultural pressures that created a market that was just hungry for private digital purity tools.
Right. And this specific market pressure cooker is the unique religious and cultural landscape of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the LDS community.
This cultural context is really essential to understanding the whole story, isn't it?
It's everything. The LDS community maintains these extremely strict moral standards, particularly around sexuality, and this generates immense internal conflict, but also a system of external accountability.
And paradoxically, this strictness is what creates the high demand for private, non-judgmental recovery tools.
Exactly, because the official channels for dealing with this carry such a high spiritual and social cost.
So the central conflict here revolves around what's called the LDS law of chastity. How exactly does that doctrine extend to things like masturbation and pornography consumption?
Traditionally, the LDS law of chastity prohibits all sexual activity outside of heterosexual marriage. That's the baseline. But historically, church leaders have explicitly and repeatedly taught that this law includes masturbation and viewing pornography. They're defined as serious sins.
Not just, mistakes or imperfections, but sins.
Serious sins. For example, a former church president, Spencer W. Kimball, he taught that the law includes masturbation and every hidden and secret sin and all unholy and impure thoughts and practices.
Wow. The language is designed to leave zero ambiguity. This is a moral failing.
It's incredibly heavy, especially when you're talking about normal human development and sexual urges. It's extremely punitive.
How so?
Well, we have sources quoting an apostle, Bruce R. McConkie, from back in 1958. He spoke very strongly against masturbation, declaring it was condemned by divine edict.
A divine edict.
And he listed among the chief means that the devil uses to lead souls to hell.
To hell. That's incredibly charged rhetoric.
It is, and it ensures that what many secular psychologists might categorize as a common or even natural behavior gets completely pathologized. It's equated with spiritual death inside the LDS structure.
And what about more recently?
More recently, Elder Dallin H. Oaks emphasized that any involvement with pornography negatively affects a member's spirituality, their ability to feel the spirit, and, for men, their capacity to exercise what's called priesthood power.
So the severity of the sin isn't just about internal guilt. It directly impacts a member's core spiritual identity and their function within the whole church structure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And this is what leads us to the core market catalyst we've been talking about,
Which is?
the burden of mandatory ecclesiastical accountability.
Explain that.
The traditional prescribed channel for repentance, which is required to clear your conscience and be considered worthy, is to discuss these sins with your priesthood leaders. Most often, that's the local bishop.
This sounds like a system of required confession. Even if it's just to one leader, it's not private.
It is mandatory for maintaining worthiness. For instance, if you want to serve a mission or hold a position in the church, or, most importantly, enter the temple, you have to go through what are called worthiness interviews.
And they ask you about this stuff directly.
Well, the seriousness of these offenses means that a member's conscience and spiritual sensitivity are tested against these standards. The sources indicate that there are at least 5 different temple recommend questions that are designed to elicit a confession and a discussion on issues related to honesty, content consumption, and of course, adherence to the law of chastity.
Let's unpack the emotional and psychological toll of this mandated confession, because that seems to be the engine driving the market for private alternatives. What are the dynamics of that interview with the bishop?
Well, the problem isn't just the accountability itself. It's the nature of the authority figure and the environment.
Yeah.
Bishops are lay leaders. They're volunteers. They are not professional therapists.
And they're asking about deeply personal sexual matters.
Yes. They are sometimes asked to question members, including preteens and teenagers, explicitly about masturbation.
That's difficult to imagine.
This mandatory confessional environment, when you couple it with the high spiritual stakes, I mean, the threat of losing your temple worthiness, which is seen as the only path to eternal salvation, is what critics and former members describe as generating ridiculous amounts of guilt and shame.
It sounds like the system, which is intended for spiritual relief, can often act as a trauma generator instead.
It can, especially for young people who are just navigating normal sexual development under this intense moral scrutiny. It just increases the potential for profound psychosexual shame among members because it ties their spiritual value directly to their physical habits.
And the emotional and social cost of this confession process must be enormous.
It is. If you confess something that's deemed severe, you risk being placed on probation. You could potentially lose privileges, and you could face social ostracization in what is often a very tight-knit community.
So when the official institutional channel for spiritual relief, the bishop's interview, carries such a high, life-altering spiritual and social cost,
Then private commercial alternatives that promise you anonymity and non-judgmental tracking suddenly become incredibly valuable.
that is the ultimate tension, isn't it? And the core driver of this market.
It is. The tension between the desire for spiritual cleanliness and the absolute fear of institutional exposure and shame. That high emotional cost acts as the ultimate market catalyst for digital moral solutions that offer a way out of that confessional spotlight.
Okay, so this cultural pressure leads us directly to the app that we're focusing on, Goon-Free.
Right.
Its origin story is rooted precisely in the struggle. It was reportedly founded by young members of the LDS faith who were trying to manage their own intense struggles with what they defined as porn addiction under the weight of all these church expectations.
And Goon-Free is positioned very strategically. It's marketed as a self-improvement application and notably as the leading no-fap tracker for men.
The language is very much about self-empowerment.
Totally.
Yeah.
Its primary objective is to help users reclaim your focus, confidence, and energy and break free for good. It frames the struggle as a legitimate battle against external forces, but it frames the solution as internal self-mastery.
So it's monetizing the language of modern wellness-focused energy, confidence, to solve what is, at its root, a deeply moral and theological problem.
Exactly.
Let's get into its design. What are the key features that make up this self-regulation model?
The architecture very consciously relies on internal discipline rather than external surveillance. That's the key.
Okay, feature number 1.
The first and most central feature is the streak tracker and progress stats. This is the main gamification element. It measures your abstinence duration visually so users can watch their streak grow day by day.
It turns moral success into a measurable, quantifiable metric.
Right. And it provides immediate, non-judgmental, positive reinforcement. You look at the number, you feel good.
That is a classic quantified self approach, but it's being applied to morality. It turns a spiritual struggle into a kind of game you can win with technology.
That's a great way to put it. Secondly, they have daily check-ins and motivation. This ensures accountability.
But importantly, accountability to yourself.
To the self, exactly, not to an external authority figure like a bishop. Third, you have the urge control tools.
These are the practical psychological interventions we were talking about earlier.
Yes, the direct commercialization of basic CBT principles. We're talking breathing exercises, guided focus sessions, and immediate distractions that are designed to interrupt that compulsive cycle.
And they seem to be using some pretty trendy branding, which ties into that broader digital detox movement.
That's the fourth feature, the mind reboot tools. This includes specific, very contemporary wellness features like dopamine detox reminders.
Ah, there it is.
Along with reflection prompts and habit-building activities. They're leveraging that popular, if somewhat misleading, branding to sell these foundational cognitive self-management skills.
Okay, but you said there were 5. The 5th feature seems like the most critical differentiator in this specific market niche.
It is. The fifth feature is privacy first.
And that's revolutionary.
It's the revolutionary aspect because it responds directly to the pain point we just discussed. The app explicitly states, no data sharing, no judgment.
Wow.
That design choice is profoundly powerful because it is a direct repudiation of the dominant market model. Goon Free is designed to let the user achieve spiritual cleanliness and moral relief without paying the spiritual and social cost of that ecclesiastical confession. The technology becomes a non-judgmental substitute for the bishop.
Okay, let's make that contrast with the dominant market leader, Covenant Eyes, abundantly clear. Because they represent entirely opposing philosophical views on accountability.
Completely opposing. Covenant Eyes operates on what we can call the surveillance model. Their entire philosophy is that transparency, even painful transparency, is the only way to break the cycle of secrecy and shame.
So their system monitors your digital activity across all your devices.
All of them. Desktop, tablet, mobile, everything.
How intrusive is that monitoring, really?
It's extremely intrusive. The system periodically captures screenshots, sometimes as frequently as once every minute.
Every minute.
And then it uses AI to analyze those images for any explicit content. If it detects something questionable, it blurs the explicit image, for decency, but it still sends a detailed report.
A report of your activity.
A report with the timestamp, the surrounding context, and it sends it to an external accountability partner or ally.
And then that partner gets the report through a separate app.
Correct. It's called the Victory app.
So Covenant Eyes is based on enforcing compliance through external social pressure and the absolute certainty of exposure. If you fail, someone you know and trust is going to see the evidence.
Exactly. It mandates external social accountability. Goon Free, on the other hand, consciously avoids all external monitoring.
It replaces the bishop or the surveillance partner.
With non-judgmental, purely internal technology, you're only accountable to your streak and to yourself. And this high level of privacy in a community where exposure can literally cost you your social and spiritual standing is why Goon Free can command such a premium.
It's selling self-determination.
It's selling self-determination and the removal of the fear of institutional authority. So this commercial success of the self-regulatory model, operating inside this high shame environment, it really forces us to look at the price point and the ethics of commercializing culturally induced guilt.
We've established that privacy and non-judgment are the core products here, but they come at an incredibly steep cost. What is Goon Free's annual price?
Goon Free sits right at the high end of the market.
Yeah.
The annual subscription cost is approximately $149.
$149 a year.
Yeah. And based on initial download estimates, the app was projecting a pretty substantial annual profit, estimated at around $330,000.
Wow.
Which demonstrates that while the demographic is pretty niche, the demand is incredibly high and the profitability margins are significant.
That is a massive price tag for an application that, at its core, gamifies adherence to basic CBT principles. So why does this self-monitoring app command a higher price than, say, many complex filtering or productivity suites?
Well, the fee, as critics analyze it, is for purchasing far more than just a digital service.
What are you buying?
You're purchasing anonymity and moral self-determination. You're buying the freedom to pursue spiritual relief without paying the spiritual, social, and psychological costs that are associated with ecclesiastical confession.
Costs that are often perceived as just overwhelming.
Exactly. The alternative, the bishop's interview, is financially free. But the risk of disclosure or discipline is perceived as being far greater than $149.
So the subscription is kind of acting as a self-worth and social insurance premium? It's protecting the user from institutional exposure?
Precisely. And what's more, the high cost itself serves a psychological function.
Oh.
The sources suggest that investing such a substantial amount in a paid app, especially when you compare it to easily abandoned free options, creates this necessary mindset shift. The financial commitment signals to the user that this struggle is serious and that they are now seriously engaged in the fight. It enforces a greater sense of commitment and psychological investment.
Let's break down the competitive landscape a bit more to really understand Goon-Free's value proposition against its rivals, especially when it comes to price versus privacy.
Okay, so Goon-Free is positioning itself in that premium bracket. If we look at Covenant Eyes, the market leader with that highly intrusive surveillance model,
Right.
their cost is around $184 annually. So they're offering maximum exposure and minimal privacy for a higher price.
So that's $35 more than Goon-Free for the maximum amount of judgment and monitoring.
Correct. Then you have an app like Ever Accountable. They offer monitoring and reporting, but they make a big point of being ISO certified for privacy.
And their cost.
Their annual cost is around $129. So Goon-Free, which offers zero external monitoring, is charging more than the option that provides certified privacy protection and external reporting.
That differential really underscores that the user is paying a premium for total, absolute anonymity from any potential external authority.
That's what the value is.
And what about the lower-end options?
Tools that are focused purely on filtering and blocking, like Bulldog Blocker, which is Android only, they're cheaper, around $89 annually. Then you have Canopy, which focuses on real-time AI filtering and parental controls, and that starts at about $9.99 a month, so about $120 annually.
So Goon-Free is consistently priced near the top.
Yep. It demonstrates that the market values the combination of its specific self-mastery tools and, most critically, that guarantee of privacy from the church structure.
This business model, extracting such high value from a source of profound cultural anxiety, it naturally introduces some intense ethical scrutiny. What's the core debate surrounding this commercialization?
Well, critics argue very strongly that charging such a high premium for emotional and spiritual relief is exploiting a vulnerable demographic.
These are often young people.
Young individuals operating under intense religious guilt, desperate for relief, and feeling like they have no safe, non-judgmental institutional channel to turn to. The business model, therefore, kind of relies on capturing individuals who are psychologically and spiritually cornered.
And that draws some really direct, uncomfortable parallels to the broader addiction treatment industry.
It absolutely does. The addiction treatment sector is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and it has long been plagued by ethical issues.
For sure.
We see documented problems with excessive consumer billing, deceptive marketing practices, and a clear priority on profit over people. Analysts argue that this specialized digital accountability sector, this faith-based digital wellness space, it operates in a relative regulatory vacuum.
And the high profit margins from apps like Goon-Free, which are monetizing this culturally mandated shame.
It just raises serious questions about consumer protection and whether similar ethical standards that we use in clinical addiction treatment should be applied to these really powerful digital tools.
The implication is that the high cost isn't solely based on the development of the app or its utility,
but on the exploitation of a profound, culturally induced emotional need.
It's the monetization an institutional failure.
Or at least the monetization of the institution's high cost of entry for spiritual relief. The price tag is a direct reflection of how intensely the user wishes to avoid the scrutiny of their local leadership. And, the development of apps like Goon-Free isn't happening in a vacuum. It's intrinsically linked to the cultural environment of Provo, Utah, often called Utah County, which is a major tech hub with an overwhelmingly high LDS population.
Right, the Silicon Slopes.
Exactly. And it's a sphere that's famous for where piety intersects with highly aggressive and sometimes ethically controversial business decisions.
Which leads us to this anecdote in the sources that really just clarifies this cultural fusion of faith and commerce.
Yeah.
It's a story that recounts a truly astounding business decision made by a CEO of a similar Mormon-founded startup.
This anecdote perfectly encapsulates the mindset we're discussing.
Yeah.
So this startup was facing a critical cash crunch. The CEO was struggling to secure crucial funding to keep the company afloat.
And his employees.
Due to the financial crisis, his employees had not received their payroll for 3 full months.
3 months. That's illegal, and it's devastating.
It is. Employees were piling up personal debt, and some were forced to use food stamps just to feed their families.
So this is an absolute emergency situation. The company's survival and the welfare of every single employee rests on immediate financial action.
Precisely. And the CEO had this crucial opportunity to attend a high-stakes sales conference, the very event that could potentially secure the necessary funding to make payroll.
Okay.
However, the conference took place on a Sunday, and the CEO, prioritizing his interpretation of religious duty, chose not to attend the critical sales conference.
You're kidding.
He felt that attending his church services was more important.
He essentially prioritized a religious mandate over the financial survival of his company and the immediate material welfare of his entire workforce.
It is an extreme illustration of this cultural mindset, a mindset where prioritizing righteousness or religious sacrifice is believed to generate a kind of supernatural blessing on the company.
That will override sound business practices.
And in this case, legal obligations regarding payroll. This cultural belief system can justify immense ethical failure. You're gambling the livelihoods of dozens of employees on the belief that God will bless the company for prioritizing a Sabbath observance, even when your employees are facing illegal shorting of wages and destitution.
That deeply contextualizes the environment where an app like GoonFree was developed, an environment where piety and aggressive tech business models coexist and sometimes result in these really questionable priorities.
And tying this back to the ad itself, this commercial model, while it offers privacy, it carries this inherent risk of substituting one form of dependence, a religious dependence on authority, for a new one.
Digital dependence.
A digital dependence on a quantified metric.
That intense focus on the streak, it sounds incredibly fragile.
It is. The intense focus on maintaining a perfect digital streak risks tying the user's entire sense of moral stability and self-worth directly to continuous digital compliance.
So your feeling of being clean or worthy is now tied to a number on a screen.
Yes, and if that streak breaks, if you relapse, you might feel this catastrophic moral and emotional collapse, which could, paradoxically, drive the compulsive behavior even harder.
And structurally, any relapse mandates that you have to continue your financial engagement with the app.
That is the essential business model. A relapse doesn't just break the moral metric, it structurally mandates that the user must continue the subscription to begin the rebuilding process.
The emotional need to reset the streak and regain that feeling of moral validation is tied directly to a continuous financial commitment.
Of $149 a year. It creates a powerful, recurring revenue model that's built on the perpetual possibility of failure.
So what do experts in addiction recovery say is the genuine path to long-term healing? And how do these quantified apps risk short-circuiting that process?
Experts are very clear on this. Genuine, long-term recovery requires addressing the underlying emotional issues that are fueling the compulsive behavior in the first place.
Things like anxiety, stress, loneliness.
Or unresolved trauma. It requires developing authentic vulnerability and engaging in the hard emotional labor of building meaningful human relationships. It's about filling the emptiness that the digital habit was masking.
And the apps. They simplify that complex emotional labor.
They do. Apps that prioritize quantification, control metrics, and these simplified dopamine detox reminders. They risk circumventing that messy, necessary emotional process.
They offer temporary relief.
And an illusion of control through a perfect digital metric. But they may inhibit the development of the authentic self-awareness and human connection that are required for long-term emotional and spiritual stability.
So the ultimate tension is between the clean, quantifiable control of the technology
and the hard, messy reality of human healing. #outro Hala.
Wow. This has been a really revealing look into a very complex digital landscape. We've moved from defining a niche, high-intensity digital sexual practice, gooning, to understanding the profound moral and psychological damage that compulsive digital use can inflict on a person and their relationships.
And then we examine this highly specific, high-tech, and high-cost solution, Goon-free, which was born directly out of the intense cultural pressure and institutional shame that's generated within the LDS community.
Yeah, the app effectively commercializes this intense desire for privacy from intrusive ecclesiastical authority.
It really does.
The market for digital moral accountability is absolutely thriving. It's charging a massive premium for anonymity and for moral self-determination. But the success of these apps also highlights the systemic issues within the whole digital wellness sector.
A sector that profits by selling quick-fix metrics to a vulnerable population that's desperate for relief from this intense, culturally induced guilt.
And the tension for the user remains so stark. They face this choice between seeking external, traditional, and often shaming authority The bishop are purchasing private, non-judgmental accountability through a continuous financial subscription.
They're trading spiritual risk for a financial one.
So, in an age where our digital behavior is increasingly tracked and categorized and policed by both software and these rigid cultural expectations, what is the truest, most lasting measure of emotional and spiritual health? Is it a perfect, continuous digital streak maintained year after year by a paid subscription? Or is it the hard, slow work of honest, messy human connection that doesn't rely on a number?
That's the ultimate question.
And that's the question this deep dive leaves with you.